one more short story. Hello and welcome to episode 6 of One More Short Story with me, Chris Fulwell, where we celebrate a variety of stories from the world of writing battle. Looking forward to sharing these stories with you today. We are going to start having episodes themed by class. Now, I'm not talking about, Titanic, first class, steerage, women and children. No, not that. Not that sort of class. Get that thought out of your head. No. If you are involved in the current shenanigans on Writing Battle, you'll know that people get to choose a class before they start any given contest, and they're all sort of Dungeons and Dragons based. So you might be a warlock if you're into horror or other grisly stuff, or you might be a bard if you prefer more humorous stuff, or you might, like me, just choose the fighter class because anything goes and you want to see what comes your way. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because this is the first of the episodes with one of those class names attached to them. This is going to be the Wizard episode, and that is the world of fantasy. And no, that's not the kind of fantasy where you end up in a bath covered in baked beans, listening to classical music, or, any other fantasy somebody might have in theory. No, two wonderful fantasy stories. Kicking things off with EverBright, Ever Faithful by Grace Quon. And her prompts were fantasy, mercenary, and helmet. Now, all I'm going to tell you about this one is it's written from the perspective of the helmet itself. And, well, I don't want to say any more. I really, really enjoyed this one, and I know you will as well. It is read by the inimitable Sam James. His accent suits this story perfectly, and here we go. This is EverBright, Ever Faithful by Grace Quon, narrated by Sam James.
With the last of his strength, the dwarven smith Andrathath laid the helmet in front of the elven queen. The silver dragon on the crest, wings spread, glimmered in the torchlight. Its name is EverBright, a faithful companion to the Deledra family for evermore, he whispered. Its wearer shall have the strength of mountains, the speed of lightning, and the counsel of a true friend. Oh, I was full of piss and vinegar right out of the forge. Hadn't the greatest weaponsmith of the ages sacrificed himself in my creation? And the ceremony where the Queen presented me to her son in front of our troops? Well, that was stir the blood and soul stuff. The banners of the houses snapping in the wind, the armour so bright you couldn't look at us without squinting. It didn't matter if you were the lad whose spear looked like a hastily repurposed hoe, or the one-eyed sergeant who looked like he'd had a few too many pints at breakfast. By the time the trumpets sounded to send us on our way, every soldier standing could imagine being the hero who would single-handedly take Oxerno's head off his shoulders. The Dark Lord threw his minions and creatures at us as we marched, but he might as well have tossed pebbles in the water to halt the tide. The young prince was unstoppable in combat with me on his head, and our troops fought all the harder for it. He was everywhere on the battlefield. Neither armour nor dragon hide could withstand his sword. And I watched over him, whispering counsel and warnings in his ear. Soon enough, we massed outside Oxerno's black walls. Before our final assault, the young prince tucked me under his arm and galloped his stallion back and forth in front of the lines. His long blonde hair streamed behind him as he saluted the troops. He was bloody magnificent, the only child of the Queen, the star of the Teledra dynasty. Although he was getting too close to the ramparts. "Highness, your—" Then I remembered my maker's words. The magic in me was for my wearer, not my carrier. I couldn't warn the prince. I couldn't speed him away. I couldn't even stand between his skull and the arrow fired by a sharp-eyed archer on the wall. 2 armies watched in stunned silence as the prince crumpled. When his body hit the ground, jeers exploded from the battlements. But at least his general had the presence of mind to race out for me. When he jammed me on his head, I swore we would make them all pay. Except nothing happened. There was no connection between us. When Andrathath said I would be a companion to the royal family, apparently he meant only the royal family. He'd woven a ward through me to ensure that. Maybe he was a pessimist who meant it as a safeguard. Maybe he was just a literal-minded bastard. Either way, everything went to shit after that. Once Uxeano's army had finished wiping the battlefield with us, I became a prized piece of plunder. I was too small for an orc head, but the abominations thought it a great laugh to use me as a bowl. At first, I bristled at the indignity, plotted and schemed at revenge. But without a royal elf head under me, I couldn't even be heard. I was no better than the lowliest grunt's helmet. When I heard of the Queen's death, what was left of my pride fled like the coward that it was. The only mercy was that as my lustre dulled and dents accumulated, the orcs lost interest, and I became just another bowl amongst others in the baggage wagons. An eternity of silence and meaninglessness stretched out ahead of me. All I could hope was that someday someone might melt and unmake me. In the meantime, being forgotten was the best I could ask for. Just my bloody luck, then, that an enterprising goblin sellsword spotted me at supper one night and snagged me to replace his leather helmet. When he plunked me down on his greasy hair, I developed a sudden gratitude for Andrathath's ward, although the stench of unwashed goblin would have turned my stomach if I had one. I should have known, no matter how bad things were, life could always laugh and lovingly give you another punch in the face. Instead of only hearing about Uxeano's triumphs, I was now forced to participate in them. The Goblins' Company hunted the last remnants of opposition and terrorised the villages that harboured rebels or failed to pay their ever-increasing taxes. And I watched them do it, protected his loathsome head while he murdered and tortured his way through our once free lands. But the arsehole's success turned into my eventual deliverance. He grew rich enough to retire, although instead of stowing me in a storage chest like I hoped, he put me on display in his great hall. Gods damn it. It was even more humiliating than being an orc bowl. When his old lieutenant dropped by on his way through to his next slaughter, they stood in front of me reminiscing. "Got me through the walls, it did." The goblin patted me. His eyes widened, and his jaw dropped, because of the throwing axe that was now embedded in his forehead, or the arrow in his friend's throat, I assumed. He should have learnt from the prince. When push comes to shove, a helmet on a head is worth 200 in the bush. One of the intruders, a dwarf, picked me up.
Bit old, but well crafted,
he said to their leader. Good, we need all the arms we can get. She took off her own helmet, and recognition flared through me. The young prince's and the queen's features were redrawn on the woman's face. On second glance, however, the resemblance wasn't as strong, and it didn't take long to realise why. She was half human. For a moment I wondered how this could be, but then I remembered what was most important. A twig of the Teledra family tree had survived. A faint hope sparked in me, almost too painful to acknowledge. But she had already turned away to consult with the archer, who was extricating his arrow from the lieutenant. I searched for something, anything, that could bring her attention back. I could not fail my kingdom again. I screamed a silent scream unheard by all. Why the hell had my maker bound me to the royal family? A thought struck. Andrathath, you glorious bastard. I found the link he'd forged between me and the Teledras, and, whispering a prayer to all the gods, I pulled. The woman paused, confusion crossing her face. "Did you say something?" she asked the dwarf.
Not me,
he grunted. He was ransacking the goblin's desk, tossing things onto the floor. She spun in a slow half-circle, looking round. Then her gaze fell on me, and her forehead creased. It had worked. If I had legs, I could have danced a jig on the spot. Of course, if I had legs, I could have done a lot of other things differently over the years. She picked me up and rubbed the stump where the dragon once stood. It seems familiar. This was it. I poured everything I had left into that fragile connection, willing her to put me on. Please. As if in a trance, she lifted me onto her head, and we were joined. Her shock vibrated in me. EverBright, we thought you were lost to us. I thought the same, but we found each other. Gods, was I getting sentimental? Although you could have been quicker about it. She choked out a laugh, as if she'd forgotten how to do it. My apologies, but I hope you'll forgive me. I need all the help I can get. I felt remade, reforged. Aye, let's show Xerno what a half Teledra and an orc bowl can do.
Lovely fantasy story there from Grace. Thank you so much, Sam, for your narration and your editing and everything else on that. Some lovely work. Not just a writer, a man of many talents. Now, the nature of writing battle, of course, being a competition, means that some stories don't progress as far as we'd like. In fact, I'd say most people's stories don't progress as far as we'd like them to. This is how it goes in a competition. Now, Grace's story in the Wonder Battle didn't make it out of the house stage. It got a few votes, it did well, but it didn't quite get that magic number it needed to escape the house stage. But there are two very important things to note here. First of all, Grace was awarded a rare trophy during the judging of that. Those of you taking part in the professional battles will know about these trophies, or prophies as they've been sometimes coined on the forum, were only given out to 5 stories per judge in the entire round. So that's dozens and dozens of stories, and yeah, one of those judges selected Grace's to receive this trophy. So the number of points you get in a battle is not the be-all and end-all. And then crucially, Grace has got herself published. This story has been published in the very first edition of Goblins and Galaxies, and its name ended up on the front cover. So well done, Goblins and Galaxies, for picking this up. I approve of your choices. But I suppose the reason I'm labouring this point is I'm not trying to make Grace feel better. I don't need to do that. She's an amazing writer. What I'm trying to say is that those of us who take part in writing battle or other competitions or other writers in general, if a story doesn't succeed in the way you want it to first time, there's going to be a life for it elsewhere. There are going to be other people who can read it. There are other places that will publish it. So we shouldn't give up. Yeah. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Seriously though, Grace did a really good job, and well done for sticking to your guns and getting it out into the world where it deserves to be. Next up in our fantasy theme, we've got Of Ferrets and Foxes by Regan Westergard. Now, Regan in real life has a passion for ferrets. I promise I'm not making that up. And that comes through in so much of this story. Now, I'm going to break with my tradition here and tell you about the details and the results before, and there's good reason for that. This was from last year's autumn short story competition. It was in the cozy fantasy genre, and her other prompts were church and survivor. Now, I won't spoil the story for you because it is genuinely wonderful, and I don't want to give it away, but I will tell you that Regan got runner-up for this one. Yeah, she got one of those fancy gold trophies in a running shoe, and deservedly so. She came so close to winning the whole thing, and she's narrated it for us as well. So here we go, Of Ferrets and Foxes, written and narrated by Regan Westergard.
A ferret makes a terrible errand boy. Sable held the ridiculous creature at eye level, his long body dangling happily from her hand. She scowled at him, noting irritably that his adorable tongue was poking out. "Egg," she said. His mauve nose twitched. Sable sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of her nose with her ferret-free hand. "I told you to go find me 3 bulbs of wild garlic." The ferret gave a little squeaky grunt of confirmation. "And you brought me," she said, looking at the small pile on her apothecary countertop, "1 whitecap mushroom," grunt, "2 orange leaves," grunt, "and somebody's gold tooth." Egg wriggled in her grasp, squeaking with delight. Sable dropped him 3 inches back to the countertop and let her forehead fall into her hands. Egg nosed his way between her elbows, propped up on the counter. His stubby black legs all seemed to move at separate times, indifferent to the bendy slope of his golden brown body. "Don't try to be cute, I'm annoyed with you." Egg yawned widely, little pink tongue curling amidst a tiny maw of lethally sharp teeth. Other witches got useful familiars, but Sable had been stuck with this chaotic neutral sausage link for years. As Egg slid gracelessly from the counter and ambled off to find a suitable napping corner, Sable cast her gaze toward the vaulted stone ceiling. Her apothecary had once been some kind of church, dedicated to a forgotten god. The narrow, stained glass windows were perfect for keeping the sunlight off her potions and ingredients. Sable was staring at the gold tooth in front of her, trying to figure out where in the pits of hell Egg had found it, when the front door creaked open. "Welcome to Edelrune Apothecary," she said absently, gaze lingering now on the teeth marks in the mushroom's cap. "How can I help?" But her voice died in her throat when she looked up. The woman standing in her entryway was not a resident of the nearby village. She had sleek black hair and coppery skin. Her narrow eyes curved strikingly across the wide plane of her face. "Oh, hi," Sable stuttered, flushing a very flattering shade of crimson. You seem—" "I am new in town, yes," the woman said, her smooth voice slicing through Sable's bumbling. She took a step toward the counter. "I hear you are the person to see about potions." Sable opened her mouth and waited for something even remotely intelligent to come out. That depends, she said finally. What do you need? A normal human sentence. Well done. The woman padded to the counter, eyes darting across the wall of jars behind Sable. Her beautiful lips tightened ever so slightly. I need a love potion, she murmured. Sable's heart stumbled to a stop. A wave of irrational disappointment swept over her. Of course a woman who looked like this wouldn't have moved here alone. I sell them, Sable said, working to keep her voice professional. But they can only bring existing feelings to the surface. They cannot create love. The woman frowned, thin brows coming together. It will have to do, she sighed, pulling an embroidered coin purse from her belt. As Sable scrawled out a payment slip, she stole another glance up at the woman. Her high cheekbones and strong jaw set Sable's heart thundering. Her cheeks burned, and she fixed her gaze back on the slip of parchment. Can I have your name, please? The request came out in an abnormally high pitch. The woman paused for a few moments before responding, Rian. Sable's quill hovered over the paper. Rian? Her mouth felt clumsy around the foreign syllables. Egg scrambled up the counter and across the slip, leaving an inky paw print on the edge of the parchment. Rian, the woman repeated, slowly this time, her eyes following Egg's progress into a bundle of fresh sage. The bundle sneezed. Sable shook her head. Sorry, could you spell that? Rian laughed. It was an unexpected sound, like the bark of a fox. When Rian had finally left, Sable felt almost drunk. She had just sold the most beautiful woman she had ever seen a love potion. Rian returned to the apothecary every week, purchasing the same concoction each time. Sable dutifully avoided asking questions about whom the love potions were going to, and Rian didn't offer any insights. It wasn't until her third visit that Sable even learned the name of her homeland. It is an empire called Kore, far across the western sea, Rian said, her long, slender fingers brushing along Egg's lengthy back. The useless weasel had just returned from a long journey, during which he'd collected a purple egg of unknown origin rather than the bunch of clover Sable had asked for. Now he was sprawled flat on his belly, legs obscured beneath him. Sable narrowed her eyes at the ferret. She never thought she'd be jealous of an animal with the IQ of a watermelon. She chanced another look at Rian's face. Her beautiful eyes were so dark, nearly black, and pulled Sable into their depths. Rian gazed back at her. I should probably... Do you want to have a cup of tea with me? Sable blurted out. Her face instantly began to burn, and she wondered if she had temporarily become possessed by the ghost of someone with self-confidence. Rian looked startled for a moment, her petal-like lips parting. Even Egg deigned to sit up and stare at her. Rian began, copper skin darkening. I'm sorry, it's a little chilly in here. Sable wished she could remember that spell for sinking into the floor. Come on back to my private room because it's chilly, not because I'm trying to bed you. God smite me now. She was shocked to see a shy smile curling the corners of Rian's mouth. Actually, I would love that. Sable's jaw dropped. Egg scrambled to his feet and started bouncing around the counter, back arched in a weasel war dance, and squeak grunting until he lost his balance and fell to the floor. Though I think it will have to be another day, she continued, expression shifting to one of apology. Sable's heart deflated as quickly as it had swelled. Right, yes, I'm sure you're busy, she mumbled, eyeing the potion bottle in the other woman's hands. Rian smiled gently and reached down to pat Egg goodbye. He jumped at her leg, claws snagging the fabric of her dress. Egg, Sable hissed, seizing the ferret and hoisting him into her arms. Rian chuckled as she stepped back out into the brisk autumn afternoon. Sable stared at the closed door for a few moments, hand absently stroking along Egg's silky coat. Suddenly she froze, a thrill shuddering through her. She had a somewhat unhinged idea. She held the drowsy ferret up. His little arms stuck straight out over her grip, and he blinked at her through half-lidded eyes. Egg, I have a task for you. He brightened, whiskers flaring toward her. I want you to follow Rian. She definitely should not be doing this. Don't let her catch you, just see where she goes. Grunt. She gave the thick fur on his head a pat before releasing him onto the stone floor. He scampered off, body arched up like a spring before throwing himself through a hidden ferret-sized flap in the door. Sable was startled awake by a violent digging sensation, as if an overeager mole was attempting to burrow through her ribcage. She yelped, shoving the furry thing off her before realizing what it was. Egg bounced wildly across her bed, squeaking for all he was worth. Once she had blinked the sleep from her eyes, Egg launched himself from the bed, tripping over his own shadow-black paws. Egg, what? The ferret leapt and wriggled across the enormous woven rug that covered most of the floor. I have to follow you, don't I? The weasel dance increased in intensity. Sable heaved a sigh, squinting up at the moonlight streaming through the stained glass windows. She hauled herself upright, jamming her feet into her shoes, and swaddling herself in a thick cloak before following the overexcited ferret into the night. Egg bounded into the trees just outside the border of the apothecary's herb garden, twisting over his shoulder to ensure she was still following. He led her deep into the forest, deeper than she would usually travel in search of herbs. She was about to ask the ferret if he actually knew where he was going when he stopped dead. His body fell flat to the pine needles blanketing the ground. His neck held his white face straight in the air, a remnant of his polecat blood. Sable followed his unwavering gaze and felt her breath catch. It was a fox, pacing in the moonlight. The sight alone wouldn't have usually held her interest, except this fox had 9 tails. Sable gaped at the magnificent creature, watching its unsettled steps. It paused, pointed face swiveling to stare directly into the trees where she and Egg were hidden in the shadows. Sable's heart stopped. She would know those eyes anywhere. It had been 3 days since Sable had witnessed the fox in the woods. She'd sent Egg out to collect a bestiary she knew the village elder kept in her personal library. He'd come back with a turnip, a live snake, and a freshly baked pie before she finally got her hands on the tome. She'd found a page in the back of the book, a brief account of the Gumyo, a 9-tailed fox of Kadian lore, taking the shape of a beautiful woman to lure and devour men. They were reviled in Kore, deeply mistrusted, and even murdered. Sable now understood why Ren had fled. The Gumyo would be needing her weekly dose of love potion, and Sable was steeling herself to do something stupid. Egg had woken her at the ass crack of dawn, attempting to yank an entire hibiscus bush through the ferret flap in the door. Stems now covered her entire work table, clipped leaves peppering the flagstones at her feet. She'd spent all morning wrangling the shrub's blooms into something presentable. A loud creak sent Sable's heart into her throat. Mian stepped through the door, her footfalls uncharacteristically wary. Sable hastily brushed the clipped stems to the floor and shoved the bouquet under the counter. Before she could think of something to say, Mian spoke. "You saw me." Sable's breathing quickened. "Yes." Mian's mouth twisted into something like fear or regret. "I was so tired of being hated." Sable closed her eyes before responding, "I know." She reached below the counter before her nerve escaped her and held the bouquet out to the beautiful woman before her. "These are for you, so that you know you won't be hated here." Mian took the flowers, so slowly she seemed to fear they would disappear. As Sable watched, Mian's eyes seemed to gleam with recognition. "These do not only speak of friendship," she whispered. "This flower is a symbol of love in my homeland." Sable shot a shocked glance at Egg, who stared back with abnormal steadiness. "I'm sorry," she said, feeling her stomach twisting. "I know you have someone, the person you buy potions for. I didn't mean—" Sable trailed off. Mian's gaze met hers. "There is no one. The love potions are for me." Sable gaped at her. You're drinking the potions?" Mian gave a slight nod. "When everyone in your homeland despises you, it is difficult not to despise yourself." Her words were a knife to Sable's throat. Without thinking and without a word, she stepped out from behind the counter and slipped her arms around Mian's waist. She searched Mian's eyes for any sign that this was okay. Sable got her answer when Mian's lips met hers. She tasted of love potion.
Just beautiful stuff. That I just love it, and I can see why it was so successful. Now, one of the many things I like about that is it contains a natural mixture of silly comedy with Egg the ferret, whom I think would be a wonderful pet. Perhaps Egg sounds hilarious, and mixing in that really human relationship that's blossoming there with all the awkwardness and the confusion and the what ifs, and then ending it so beautifully with the embrace and the kiss. It is, yeah, it's not like any story I've ever read before. Maybe I need to get out there and read more ferret sapphic romance stories. I don't know, maybe it's me, but it's awesome. Well done, Regan. So, 2 excellent stories from the fantasy and cozy fantasy genres. Thank you for joining us on One More Short Story with me, Chris Fulwell. We'll see you next time.